Thank you. Okay, so let's get started. So what are we doing here? What is this? Well, what we said on the tin, the famous British advert, it's one seal, it does what it says on the tin. Apologies if that's actually an in-joke. Okay, always a good way to start. Thank you very much, sir. We said that anticipation is going to be a unique, radically interdisciplinary forum for exploring how ideas of the future inform action in the present. So critically, what we're interested in is not just how to get better at prediction or how to imagine better futures, but how to understand, to reflect on, to work with and make sense of how our ideas of the future inform action in the present. And what we're arguing is that this is the development of a new field, the field of anticipation studies, that draws on disciplines from across the university and that draws on expertise from inside and outside the university. So one of the first things that we want to do, though, is really start off with you speaking and thinking and sharing with other people. So we want to start off with the question, what brings you to this conference? And we'd like you to speak to somebody you've not spoken to yet. Because the point of an interdisciplinary conference, the point of conferences is not just to hang out with the people you already know, but to try to make new relationships. So we'd like to just spend a little while for you finding somebody who you don't know already and asking them this question, what brings you to this conference? Okay, so talk to each other. Fabulous. Okay, so lots of different backgrounds we've got going on here. I'm going to hand over to Ted now to help us think through how we work together on in an interdisciplinary conference. Okay, so here's this is Professor Ted Fuller from the University of Lincoln, who was just putting his suit on, getting organised. Yeah.
You must explain to me sometime what positivism is.
You're just trying to start.
I suppose I should open with a joke as a way to do it. And I'll share this with you. I've just recently joined the Association of Professional Futurists that these good people have organised so well. And there's a lot of flow, there's a lot of good stuff on there, but I haven't really contributed much. In fact, the only thing I've contributed so far is somebody asked a question, and I answered it. And it turns out like this, I'll tell it like a joke. Good morning, I'm a futurist, and I want to tell a self-deprecating joke. Does anyone know one? So this is the second conference on anticipation. The first one, as many of you know, held in Trento very successfully 2 years ago. And we anticipated this, of course, from that point. Anticipation, to me, we have a definition, perfectly good definition. To me, anticipation is just existential. Every living thing has it and does it. It's just a question of figuring out what kind of a role it plays in our lives. So naturally, it occurs in all disciplines. It's just that we understand it differently in different disciplines. The kind of disciplines shown there. And also, why do we want to know? Well, if you want to understand behaviour, then you need to understand anticipation, because anticipation is partly causal, if not completely causal, of behaviour. So therefore, if you're making policy, if you're trying to change the world, if you're trying to change stuff, you need to know about the role and processes of anticipation. So therefore, we all do anticipation in different ways, disciplinary and professionally. So what have we got to learn from each other? Can we develop and articulate this rather hidden idea in our own fields and create cross-disciplinary ideas and new knowledge that becomes anticipation studies. So it's time to bring together these different insights to develop the field collectively, making the most of our interdisciplinarity. I mean, one thing Futures Journal, which I edit, has published special issues on transdisciplinarity. Transdisciplinarity is used, as it were, as a problem-solving device. Many futures activities are concerned with big problems and how we might recognise them and solve them. Radical interdisciplinarity means we don't share the same histories. We have different histories in different disciplines. We don't know the arguments, but if we're going to talk to each other, somehow we have to clear all of that, not use too much jargon, or at least be prepared to defend and explain the relevance of it in a particular situation, and certainly feel free to ask questions for clarification at any time during the process. My understanding of how you can work in interdisciplinary ways, and I've done some kind of evaluation work on projects on this, is it takes quite some time, mainly because people don't understand each other, they certainly don't trust each other, and they're certainly trying to defend their boundaries. So for all of us here, working on this particular interdisciplinary idea means changing our own perceptions of the world before we can do anything with regard to others' perceptions. And therefore, that leads me to a second poor joke, which is how many academics in the field of anticipation studies does it take to change a light bulb? The answer is 1. But the light bulb really has to want to change. Okay, so let's just assume we are here to find out the benefits and insights we can each bring, not conduct exercise and boundary maintenance, keeping the walls up, but being open to other change. So how do we build that? Well, we've got paper sessions with time for discussion. So paper sessions, 3 papers in an hour and a half, 20 minutes max each paper, saving the questions and discussions for the last half an hour so that we can see the meaning of the papers broadly, as opposed to just having paper discussion. Secondly, tomorrow? Yeah, tomorrow afternoon. An open space session in here is really about how we bring together themes. People can offer themes and ideas for debate. Gatherings can form, ideas can be moved on, whether it's about publishing, whether it's about projects, whether it's about network developments, whatever that might be, a space to develop the field practically. And new publishing opportunities. We have a Meet the Editor session at midday, over lunch rather, on Thursday. I'll be there with Futures. Kerry will be there with Routledge for her new Anticipation Studies series. Roberto there with Springer, and Fabrice there as editor of Prospective et Stratégie, a French magazine, a French journal on future studies. So that's a good time to think about possibilities for special issues, or for chapters for the book, for whole books in these particular series. Fourthly, invite people in to the discussion. Approach people you don't know. This is all about learning from each other. Many of you will be here on your own, so just open up the space, be friendly, make friends. Who knows? Share your ideas on the postcard wall. We have a postcard wall. Where is it?
It's out there somewhere.
It's out there somewhere. It will be if it isn't now. Guess just your ideas, builds ideas. And in anticipation The next conference is in Oslo in 2019, and Andrew Morrison will be talking about that in due course. So, just to explore the interdisciplinarity of this work, we have raised a number of questions which you have kind of attended to in the production of your papers and ideas and presentations and workshops and curated sessions and the like. How do we understand anticipatory differences? We already had some debate about that with positivism and constructionism and so on. Whether it's methodological, whether it's philosophical, whether it's practical. What are the affective and emotional aspects and embodied aspects of anticipation, beyond the rational, fears, hopes, bodies, emplacements? How do we live in time? Meaning temporality, what's now, what's the future, what's the relationship between the two? How does anticipation bridge that relationship? What does it mediate between, I think anticipation mediates between knowledge and action, but there's more to it than that. There's a temporal dimension. How does the future get made? Who's making it? What forces? What action? Who owns it? What kind of governance? All the politics of the future, and there is much of that. And how should we keep the future open, not colonized, but open, emancipatory, the future of humanity, small matters like that. Okay, let's get the conversation started.
Thank you, Ted. Good morning. My name is Johan Siebers. I'm one of the organizers of the conference, and I run the Ernst Bloch Center for German Thought here in the School of Advanced Study. I'm going to introduce our two speakers for the session that we're going to do now, Roberto Polli and Carrie Facer. Roberto was the chair of the first anticipation conference in 2015, and Carrie is the chair of this anticipation conference. We thought that that was a very nice way to get this conversation going. So we'll have two short interventions, and then there will be an opportunity for a discussion. We've asked Roberto to speak about the state of the field of anticipation studies at the moment, looking at what has happened since that first conference and what are the emerging themes and the key areas of interest at the moment. And we've asked Carrie to talk a little bit about anticipatory competencies, the idea of an anticipatory literacy and what that might look like. Roberto holds the UNESCO Chair of Anticipatory Systems at the University of Trento in Italy. He is also the editor of the Anticipation Handbook, a handbook in anticipation studies that is coming out with Springer at the moment. And he has contributed a lot to the development of the ontology of anticipatory systems over the years. Carrie Facer is Professor of Educational and Social Futures at the University of Bristol. And one of her areas is to look at how educational institutions relate to social change in a wider sense. So both are very well positioned to talk about this question of where is anticipation as a field going, and what sense can we make of the idea of anticipatory literacies in various levels in culture and society. First we'll listen to Roberto, and then we'll listen to Carrie.
The interest for anticipation is booming, so I won't be able to provide a full picture of what's happening. I'll try to give one or two impressions from both an academic and a professional point of view, just to have an idea of at least some of the novelties that are presenting today. Perhaps one of the most interesting is the Handbook of Anticipation, which is the first systematic survey of anticipation across sciences, disciplines, research programs, and field experiences. There are chapters from biology and biochemistry to anthropology, sociology, and economics, from city planning to risk management, robotics, and education, from asymmetric warfare to design, music perception. So it's a huge effort. All together, there will be about 100 chapters for 2,000 pages, which shows that there is a lot of interesting stuff around. Because the future within science, within disciplines, has been one of the silenced topics, of the topics that have not been officially recognized so far as topic for serious research. And the handbook, I mean, the very fact that there is something like an handbook shows that a huge amount of research has already been developed on these issues. But we are not aware of that. Most of what has been done is closed within disciplinary boundaries and comes under misplaced names. So the first task is to show what has been done, to establish bridges, to make people aware that there is a lot of research and results we should be aware of. And there will be two versions of the handbook. One is the classic printed version. I hope that nobody from Springer is here, because the printed version is the least interesting one, because it will become obsolete very soon. So it's much more important the online version of the handbook, because it will be updated continuously. Both in the sense that authors are asked to update their own contributions, and in the sense that there will be room for new papers from new chapters. So as soon as we discover something that is not present in the handbook and is interesting enough, there is room for adding a new chapter. So the idea is that the handbook will try to exert a traction effort on the field and to provide suggestions and ideas and ways of thinking about anticipation. Of course, a project this size runs to opposite risks. Either to become too dogmatic, I mean, this is anticipation. My preferred version of anticipation imposed over the handbook as the only official understanding of anticipation from one side, or from the other side, becoming a mess in which everyone present diverse, different, mutually non-compatible understanding of anticipation. We've tried to be in between, to offer some basic understanding of anticipation in the introductory chapters, and to ask, whenever possible, all the other contributors to place their own understanding of anticipation in reference to the preliminary, the initial chapters. So that is kind of map arising from the handbook as a whole that help people to navigate the handbook. Which is the main purpose of the handbook? Well, one of the two purposes has already been presented, showing people that there is a lot of interesting ideas and stuff and research already done. But there is a second aim of the handbook, and this is where my bold vision comes in, and maybe a vision that is not accepted by most or many of the other contributors to the handbook. But I think that the main purpose of the handbook is to begin to contribute to change our understanding of things, our understanding of reality. And from that point of view, to change our understanding of science. To contribute moving science from a primarily past-oriented effort to a primarily future-oriented effort. All the problems we are going to face in the next decades show that we need a different understanding of science in order to be able, perhaps, to face the many challenges that are growing. So, changing science or contributing to change science is one of the steps we need to develop. As a second component, let me very quickly mention my own book on anticipation, which is different from the handbook. In the handbook, I had to behave in a fair way towards all the contributors. Here I'm saying my own ideas, and I present the ways in which I see things. That may be right or wrong, but you will judge, but nevertheless it's an effort to establish the basic theoretical components of anticipation, including the philosophical frame for developing and for understanding anticipation as well. Finally, from a professional point of view, there are companies that have been established. Here is just one, which is a startup of the University of Trento, and I would like just to pick up a couple of issues that may be relevant for all of you. The ways in which we work, our principles. First of all, we refuse to work for companies. We work together with companies. I mean, delivering a report means nothing. Most reports end up in drawers. They are not read, or people read them here and there. They make some cherry picking, but they do not change the ways in which people face problems. What we need to change is the ways in which people and decision makers see problems and try to address them. So, an important aspect is to work with companies, institutions, whatever they are, in order to develop a different understanding of things. And from that point of view, we ask our clients to learn our methods. That's important, because if they do not know how scenarios are developed, our work with them will remain to the ABC, to a very superficial way, in order to develop a better understanding and to, go deeper into the problems and try to address them properly. They have to learn the methods so that we can work at a better level. As a second exemplification, we do a lot of work with schools, and we have developed during the past few years a few dozens labs in the classrooms. First, we teach teachers, we give teachers the basic of future studies. Then we help them to work with their own classes and to develop future labs in the classrooms. And very shortly, but then eventually, if some of you is interested, we can talk about them in more details. A future lab, in our understanding, has a number of basic components. It starts and ends with a test. And we use that test in order to measure, to have an idea of how deeply the students have changed their mind. So it's a way of testing the success of the lab, in a sense. But then the lab is divided into three basic components: past, future, present. Note past, present, future. For a number of reasons, the most obvious reason is that the past, present, future gives the idea that the future is a linear, an obvious result from the present. No, we have to break the temporal order, go to the past, future, present. Past, we ask students, we work with 11-year-old students to 18-year-old students. The first step is to convince them that change is the normal situation. So there is no reason to be scared by changes, because we have always lived through changes. So as soon as the level of anxiety is diminished, they became more able to think their own future in a more productive way. So first, understand that change is the norm, then develops your own idea of the future in 2 or 3 different ways. Your preferred vision of the future, but at the same time, develop also a second choice. If your preferred vision, for any reasons, won't do, okay, you should feel free to change your ideas without perceiving that as a failure. So, first plan, but also the second one. And then come back to the present. From that point of view, you have ideas from the past, ideas from the future. So, you take decisions about to do next. You develop your plan and you take responsibility for your plan. Finally, I have not said, and I've taken for granted the most relevant question: what is anticipation in the end? I think it is appropriate to distinguish at least 2 different ways of addressing anticipation. Anticipation may be taken as a lay term, and from that point of view, anticipation may mean any forward-looking attitude. Nothing wrong about that, but it's too poor as an understanding of anticipation. We need something more technical, in a sense, more developed. And here comes my proposal for understanding anticipation. First of all, anticipation is one of the components of future studies. Let's say the third level of future studies, after forecast and foresight, and I will then eventually explain what I mean. And at the same time, it comes from a completely different quarter, as the qualification anticipatory in the expression anticipatory systems. There are 2 different theories. My effort is to define them identically so that a translation from one to the other is possible. Which are the 2 basic components of anticipation as far as I understand them. The first one is a forward-looking attitude as before, but that's not enough. We need something more. We need a translation of what we have seen in our forward-looking efforts into actions. Let me give you a very simple exemplification. Watching weather forecasts for me is not an anticipatory behavior, but watching a weather forecast and as a consequence of that, taking your umbrella before going to work, that's an anticipatory behavior. So there is a model component, the result of organizing information in some way or another, maybe through forecasts or through foresights, depending on the situations and the topic you are discussing and considering in your evaluation. But then there must be an effort to translate what we have seen through your models. And by the way, when I'm talking about models, I'm not referring only to scientific models, but hopes and fears and expectations are models in my own understanding. All the tools we may use, formal and informal, for figuring out something concerning the future. But then to translate what we have seen through our models into action. So, watching weather forecast and taking our umbrella before going to work is an anticipatory behavior, at least in general, perhaps not here. But obviously, and that's my last sentence, taking your umbrella with you is not a guarantee that it will rain, apart from local situations. So, anticipatory behaviors may be wrong, as anything else, but behaving in an anticipatory way is much better than behaving in a reactive way. Waiting something to happen and then reply and then answer to what has been happened, which is a very costly and ineffective type of strategy. Thank you.
character in Britain is basically just wear lots of layers. So thank you, Roberto. So Roberto's outlined the current state of anticipation studies, where we are as a field, if you like. And I wanted to widen the discussion out to a more general question that I thought we could work on collectively as a community, both today and over the next 3 days. I wanted to ask the question, given what we're all learning about anticipation in our own fields, what would anticipatory literacy look like? What sorts of capacities in ourselves, in our students, and in society would we want to develop? And I want to suggest that the problems that we are facing, the problem of the Anthropocene, for example, is an educational problem. It's not just an engineering problem or a technical or a biochemical issue, it's an educational problem. And by that, I don't mean we need to teach more people about global warming. We've gone that way before, it doesn't work. Instead, the problem is, as we know, we haven't taught ourselves as citizens, as politicians, or as a society to think about the fundamental relationship that is the heart of the climate change debate, namely the relationship between today and tomorrow. Understanding climate change, after all, requires us to balance the demands and possibilities of the future with the demands and responsibilities of the past and the present. And yet, as Roberto has already indicated, where is the education in our schools, our universities, or anywhere else that helps us as a society, as people who vote in elections, as politicians, as scientists, to think about this complex relationship between future and present? It is missing in action. In the UK, the social and economic implications of science are currently prohibited from being taught in the science curriculum. Around the world, the global system of schooling presents education as the download of dead information into empty brains, not the use of knowledge to act on and in a changing world. And the complexity of this changing world is fragmented into ever smaller areas in our schools and societies. In the UK, again, it's possible for a politician to have no science qualification above the age of 16 years old. It's also possible for a scientist to have last had to think about the complexities of history when she was 13. So given all of this, why would we be surprised when democracy leads us to the election of a president who says that climate change is a hoax, or when we have massive gaps of incomprehension between scientists and politicians? Unless we recognise that education has a responsibility to help us think about this relationship between today and tomorrow, there will never be intelligent public debate about the Anthropocene or anything else. So what I want to do this morning is to propose some of the components, and I am proposing, that might make up what we might call anticipatory literacies, some of the tools that we might need as a society to reflect on how we think about a news future in the present. And I want to emphasise the plural here. I've spent enough time studying literacy to know there is never one literacy. There are always multiple literacies, different traditions. So I think what I'm talking about here is that we need to develop a range of cultural tools that are available to us to think about the future. Before I start, this isn't a heavily referenced paper because, to be honest, we found out that this wasn't happening yesterday, so I'm drawing on this from another session, so I'm going to give you some of the references. So these are some of the people that I've been involved with in conversations about this over the last few years. I want to just give them a name check up there. And I also want to acknowledge that obviously the question of what has been called previously futures literacies has been debated for some time as precedent. So many of you will know the work of Richard Slaughter, Hedley Beer, Jim Data, Ivana Milosevic. Okay. So, what might constitute the foundations of anticipatory literacy? My take on it is there are 4 elements. It's nothing like being definitive. I think there are 4 elements. The first of these is the capacity to play with time. The second of them is a futures-oriented curriculum. The third is emotional intelligence. And the fourth is a personal project developed through the challenge and support of friendship. So let's start with this. First of all, let's start thinking about our capacity to play with time. And I'd just like you for a minute to close your eyes. It's safe here, don't worry. You're all right, I'm not going to kind of jump on anybody, you're right, you're safe. So just think about how you visualise the relationship between past, present and future. What are you seeing? Okay, open your eyes again. See, nothing bad happened, it's all right. So some of you might be imagining this sort of thing, sort of arrow from left to right, from past to present. Now when we conjure up this sort of image, we're working with the idea of time as linear, past flowing into the future. Others may see this sort of picture. So, and what we're doing here, you know, past down, up to the top right, bottom left to top right. Here we're adding something to the concept of linear time, a concept of progress, and quite often the concept of progress towards a better future. Some of you might be seeing something completely different. Some of you might be seeing a series of waves. Civilizations grow and collapse. Any of you remember making the fruit fly chart when you were at school? That's just what I did. Anyway, I did it. But the 15th century Islamic sociologist Ibn Khaldun drew a very similar picture when he was talking about history and civilizational change. Some of you might be imagining a tree with life evolving, or cycles, the cycles of the year, of harvests, of moon. All of these suggest different relationships between past, present and future, different expectations about what will happen. For those of us operating in Western thought traditions, it's worth noticing in particular how specific the concept of linear time is, with its possibility of novelty and its narrative of progress. This conception of time is far from universal and has its own effects. If we connect this particular idea or assumption back to the question of climate change, we can see how this connects. Because one of the foundational myths that we're struggling with when we discuss climate change and what to do with it is the myth of growth, of constant, unending, always upward moving growth, which is tied to this particular Western view of time and progress. In this model, any failure to move onwards and upwards is a crisis. In contrast, if we see time and history as change and as wave-like or as cyclical, or even as coterminous with past, present and future coexisting, then a moment of crisis can become a moment for the imagination to get to work, a moment to recognise that there will always be multiple conflicting forces at work, and it's never enough to assume the job is done. Part of the difficulty that we're struggling with right now is I think that we thought a huge load of gains that we've made over the 20th century were secure and locked in. Big mistake. Similarly, a different temporal framing asks us to ask now, how do we deal with something that's broken? Asks us to ask not, how do we deal with something that's broken? But what might the next wave look like? Where are we in the cycle? What branches led to this development? So element number one in the development of anticipatory literacies is recognising that we need to unsettle and play with our assumptions about time and change, because the relationship is fundamentally not linear, but as Roberto has been saying, anticipatory. Our ideas of the future and of time influence our understanding of the past and our assumptions about possibility in the present. Now, the second item that we need is reorganizing our schools and university curricula to ensure that they support anticipatory literacies. Now, I've spent a long time working in schools, so I know how hard that sort of thing is. And actually, frankly, you know, there is a limit to how many more proposals you need for 21st century curriculum that's going to be completely different. And actually, I want to say that that isn't what we're looking for. This is not about necessarily teaching new things. It's about clear that what we are teaching in schools and universities can be better organised to help us think about the future. It's recalibration, not revolution. So the first element is recognising that we can see our existing subjects in different ways. Instead of seeing subjects as containers for pumping lots of information into students in the classic kind of free-area banking model, we need to see subjects, disciplines, as procedures for thinking, to help students make sense of new information. That's what subjects and disciplines were invented for in the 18th century. They were systems to help us make sense of new information. As Chad Wellman, whose brilliant book, Reorganizing Enlightenment, which if you haven't read, you should read, it's fabulous, it's about the history of modern research university, points out, the disciplines arose in response to massive information overload come the Enlightenment. So what that means is that we understand science not as a body of knowledge, but as a set of procedures for working out how we judge new stuff, like the changing thickness of ice in the Antarctic. Or we can understand literature not as a bunch of books, but as a way of connecting up with new ideas. Think about T.S. Eliot's essay on tradition and the individual talent. In other words, what this means is we can keep our subjects, we just flip them on their head, and recognise we teach them for what they teach us about how they can help us think about tomorrow, not just what they can tell us about the past. The second element of our reorganised curriculum is to recognise that our disciplines already and always offer us different stances and orientations to the future, and what we need to do is to draw this out. This repertoire includes stewardship, the capacity to protect, for, care and nurture diversity. We can see stewardship as a practice in everything from studying ancient civilizations to study of biodiversity. Teaching stewardship is teaching the value of diversity in the world and the diversity of knowledge as a resource for keeping the future open. The second stance to the future that our disciplines already offer is modelling, the capacity to explore different future scenarios. We see this most in maths and sciences, but the capacity to invent and explore interactions between individuals or trends is also at the heart of what drama and literature do. Teaching and modelling is about helping us think about unintended consequences and interactions in a variety of different ways. The third stance towards the future is, this is reflexivity. It should say critique. I'll tell you in a minute. Anyway, but is critique, which is a systematic capacity taught across all subjects, but which often finds its home in the social sciences and in psychology, to challenge our own and others' assumptions about what counts as common sense and about the ideas of the future that are emerging. Teaching critique is about teaching us to ask what information is missing and what perspectives are present or absent. And finally, our disciplines teach us experimentation, the evolved human capacity that starts from the assumption that one of the ways to understand and to make sense of the future is to build it. So when we teach experimentation, we're teaching the ability to create, to juveniles, little jetties into the future, to create prototypes, to play with possibilities and to reflect on them. The question we need to ask then is, how do we support students, and actually ourselves often as educators in universities, to get better at seeing these different stances that are already there in what we're teaching, and how these different orientations relate to the future? How can we help our students work out when different stances might be required? When is modelling the right approach? When should we experiment? When should we steward and care for diversity? When do we need to question our assumptions? Critically, what we need today is students who are able to use this repertoire fluently. No more engineers who can only experiment but not care for things. No more social scientists who can only question assumptions and not make anything and speak as a social scientist. So this is the content of anticipatory literacy, and it doesn't require revolution, just recalibration. The third element, I think, however, is arguably the most important. This is the ability to understand, to recognise and work with the emotions that thinking about the future necessarily brings. So I want you to take a moment again, to close your eyes again, and think about how you feel about different ideas of the future. And not what you think about them, not whether you think they're going to happen or not. What do you feel? So shut your eyes again for a second. So for example, what do you feel when I tell you that the future will be business as usual? It'll just carry on the way it is now. Happiness? Dread? What about a future of crisis and catastrophe when everything we know descends into chaos? Some might feel excitement, others panic. How do you feel about a future where we just tighten our belts, limit ourselves, try to fit within constraints? What about a future of radical transformation, where we make our way through to a significantly better way of organising ourselves and our relations with the planet? Okay, you can open your eyes now. These four stories of the future are, of course, what Jim Dayton calls the four core myths of the future: continuity, restraint, collapse and transformation. But what I'm interested in here is how you're feeling in response to these different possibilities. And what do you think that emotion does to the way you make decisions in the present about your assumed future? What does it do to the capacity to understand that future and its possibilities? What's interesting is recognising first that a particular objective future does not have to be tied to a particular emotion. And second, that there is no good or bad emotion in relation to ideas of the future. And here I'm reminded of the brilliant project led by the late Dr. Sue Porter in my home University of Bristol. And this project brought together environmental activists and disability campaigners to explore the question, what does it mean to live with the loss of a future that had been hoped for, and to explore what other unexpected and possible futures might come from moments of grief and sorrow. And I remember Sue talking to me about the ways in which medical professionals can often be focused on getting patients back to normal, and that this misses the potential for new and different ways of life that might emerge out of radical loss. Similarly, I'm reminded also of Vanessa Andreotti's work that argues that it's only in giving up hope for the old futures that we grew up with, it's only by holding an old civilization and hospicing it through to its final days to death that we can begin to enable something new to emerge. The critical issue, therefore, is not to think that certain specific futures should necessarily be associated with positive emotions and desires, transformation hopeful, collapse fearful, for example, but instead to explore how fear and hope and love and care are all concerned in our thinking about the future, and how working with that full range of emotions allows us to see and open up different possibilities in the present. And finally, the fourth element of anticipatory literacies lies in the development of what we might call a personal project, and the networks of friendship needed to challenge and sustain this project. Sociologist Margaret Archer describes contemporary conditions as a morphogenetic society, one in which culture, technology, social institutions all interact to speed up change. In these conditions, she argues, a new form of reflexivity is required from that which has previously been available to us in prior modes of social organisation. She argues that we can no longer rely on communicative reflexivity, which is characterised by decision-making and reflection in traditional and small-knit communities with low levels of external change, where novelty is dealt with by reference to the known, by reference to the people that are like you. Nor can we rely on autonomous reflexivity, which emerged, Margaret Archer argues, with modernity and with the development of cost-benefit analysis. In other words, the calculation of the impact of different future trajectories. In a changing world, Archer argues, this simply won't stack up. Today, instead, she says, we're seeing the emergence of two new forms of reflexivity. First of these is fractured reflexivity, the identity that is pulled simply from pillar to post, drawn to the latest fad and fashion, the ideal neoliberal subject struggling to form a coherent identity. And the second is spontaneous meta-reflexivity, which is not snappy as a phrase. She argues that this latter mode of reflexivity is what's needed to survive in these rapidly changing societies. And it's characterised by the development of a personal, ethical project, a set of values and goals that allows the individual to respond to contemporary conditions by discerning in that chaos the opportunities and resources it offers to take forward that personal project. It's a form of surfing waves of change, of dancing, an adaptive ability that allows the dance to continue even while the music changes. Now, this to me feels helpful, but it's also potentially problematic in its individualism, its framing of the individual as an autonomous being. To add to this concept, then, I would draw on John McMurray, who's a sort of mid-20th century communitarian philosopher, and argue that we need to draw in the idea of friendship. In other words, we need to recognise that personal projects are created and located within networks of social relations that will challenge and sustain that project. As McMurray argues, friendship is the ultimate future-facing relationship. Think about your own friendship. In a friendship, the relationship is non-utilitarian. The agency and subjectivity of the other are recognised. The challenge is to evolve that subjectivity and that agency in negotiation with your own. Friendship is a space of co-emergence where we confront the personal projects of others with love, with a commitment to understand, and respectively to challenge. Indeed, Friendship is arguably the concept that Chantal Mouffe is lacking in her ideas of agonistic democracy. So the fourth element that I'd propose for our suite of anticipatory literacies are the development of personal projects and the friendship and collective networks to challenge and sustain them. What would our universities and our schools look like if they were oriented towards helping students understand who they are, what they alone have responsibility for, and to nurturing friendship and through friendship democracy? So these, I think, are the components we need for anticipatory literacy. The ability to play with time, a futures-oriented curriculum, emotional intelligence, and a personal project developed through the challenge and support of friendship. What does all of this mean for developing our capacities to survive the Anthropocene? Well, I think it means, first of all, any of us who have an interest in this need to call out the current organisation of schooling for what it is. A crazy, individualised, information-obsessed, content-driven, performance and management-fixated system that is not going to do the job of developing citizens to deal with the intellectual, emotional and practical challenges of the world that we're living in. The second thing is that those of us in universities have to act where we stand. We need more interdisciplinary courses that develop students' repertoire of tools for thinking about modelling, experimenting and stewarding the future. We need courses that unsettle students' cultural assumptions rather than treating them as consumers. We need courses that allow students to know that they can be agents of change, and we need university experiences that encourage students to be emotionally intelligent. Some of this is already happening, but more can be done. Now, to finish, I know that many of you will be thinking, we can't just wait for the next generation to do stuff, and I agree with you, we absolutely should not be saying that the next generation will fix everything, it's fine, we'll just crack on with the way we've been going. It's not a good plan. But it is worth recognising that education isn't just about the long term. It can have immediate and powerful effects if we understand that students and young people are capable of acting in and on the world. Consider what happened in the week that Trump was elected. Buried in the news that week, alongside the protests at Standing Rock, is a little-known fact that a group of school students secured the right to sue the president and the US government over their failure to act to prevent climate change. A major change in the US has always, well, frequently been achieved on the back of legislation. This group of young people are demonstrating how students equipped with anticipatory literacies are potentially powerful allies in improving the quality of public debate about the future. What might happen if there were more of them? And what could we, as a community of scholars and workers, researchers, activists, advisors, what can we do as a community to build students' capacities to think about and act on the future? Thank you very much.